Hi, Gary.
Hello, Bob.
How you doing?
Good, and you?
I'm doing okay. I should say for our podcast listeners, you are Gary Hart, and I am Robert Wright. You, of course, are the famous former senator, former presidential candidate, current author, and so on. And I wanted to talk to you tonight because I think your party needs you. As you know, there's been something of a reversal of fortune between Obama and McCain, if the polls are to be trusted. So I wanted to just spend a little time asking you if you were put in charge of the Obama campaign and could draw on your wealth of political experience, how you would reverse the reversal of fortune. So if you're game for that, we can just dive in.
Well, you can't watch American politics without believing it is full of wonder and mystery. In the space of about 48 hours, the two campaigns totally reversed roles, and the celebrity campaign became the town meeting campaign, and the town meeting campaign became the celebrity campaign. But to more directly answer your question, if I were in charge, I would revert to a kind of political aphorism which says, if you can't solve a problem, make it bigger. And if I were running the Obama campaign, I would make this race bigger. By that I mean I would have the candidate give one speech and then thereafter reiterate over and over again that we are in an age of transformation, that ordinary politics will not do, that what I have been meaning over the months about change means to fundamentally alter the course of America in major ways by transforming our economy, transforming our foreign policy, and transforming our military. And then I would be very specific about how to do each of those things.
Now, this is interesting because it sounds as if, there's nothing in that is directly responsive to what has happened over the last 10 days to which this reversal of fortune is attributed. And I'm curious about that, actually. How would you describe what has happened? Everyone agrees it has something to do with Sarah Palin and the Republican convention, but at a finer grain level, what do you think happened?
Well, just what is going to continue to happen, and that is the ebb and flow of the tide. And I think what you will see over the next 5 or 6 weeks, this being a very short national campaign, is one side up one week and the other side up the next week. And it will go back and forth until about the last 7 or 10 days of October. And then the undecideds who will determine the outcome will begin to crystallize. And it will be like a high school chemistry experiment where you pour ingredients together and you wait and watch, and then all of a sudden crystals start forming. And that's what will happen toward the end of October. And it will be a shift of 5 to 7 points one way or the other. Of course, I think it will go to Obama on the failure of the current administration and the Republican Party and the need for a shift of parties, but also on the issue of who can best run the country in this age of transformation. If I'm right about making the presidency bigger, then you define it in such a way that John McCain and his sidekick cannot do it.
So that's interesting. Because you're talking about a not an issue-oriented campaign in a really specific sense. You're not talking about a laundry list of issues campaign, but you're talking about a campaign of substance. And I think the sense I've got is that increasingly American presidential elections are almost one without reference to substance, in the sense that it seems to me that increasingly the object of the game in presidential elections, and Republicans are especially good at this, is to convince the electorate that your opponent is the type of person they hated in high school, right? I mean, John Kerry, wasn't he the kind of person you hated in high school? And Barack Obama, isn't he one of these kinds of, isn't he a little too full of himself? And if that's really the game, you would say, okay, well, how do you do this to McCain? You seem to be not at all convinced that has to be a big part of the game. In other words, redefining your opponent's persona on your own terms doesn't have to be a big part of the game.
No, it's totally different. And I think you have to go back almost to 1948 and the surprise Truman election. Because what people understood at that time, and it was a very critical time in American history, was that America had to become a different kind of country. And they had to choose between this kind of guy from the Midwest that they didn't know much about, who had the presidency dumped in his lap because the great Franklin Roosevelt had died, or a strange-looking man from New York, governor of New York, named Dewey. And they opted for Truman, both because on a visceral level they trusted him, but because they had a sense, and I would heavily underscore sense, this is very important in American politics, that he could manage this transformation of moving America into an important leading role in the world better than the other guy. And that's what it'll get down to. It isn't just who do you want to have a beer with, or who reminds you of your first husband, as they said about George H.W. Bush. But who do you down deep think can fundamentally alter the direction of the nation? Now, that happens only once in about half a century, but I am absolutely convinced that's what has to be done now, and I just wish I could convince Barack Obama to say that.
But it seems to me the Republicans have successfully complicated that strategy in what was maybe inadvertent, but in the end a kind of masterful jujitsu, it seems to me, with Sarah Palin. Because, a prerequisite for your strategies working is for the candidate who claims to be the transformational candidate or be capable of overseeing the transformation to indeed seem to be worthy of that challenge. And what happened with Sarah Palin is that she turned the conversation to the question of experience. And the Democrats, Obama supporters cooperated massively by accusing her of lacking experience. And she kind of came back and said, well, wait a second. If I don't have experience, how much does Obama have? I've got a couple of things Obama doesn't have, a couple of administrative roles in politics, mayor and governor. And he hasn't really been in the Senate all that long. So how much of a difference is there? And I think she succeeded in casting doubt on his actual capabilities. So how do you establish not only that you want to be the candidate of change, but that you're really capable of overseeing it?
Well, two or three observations, Bob. First of all, the mistake in the near term has been to play on their turf and to get into that experience debate, because it's not the real debate. And I revert once again to my grand strategy of defining the presidency bigger than John McCain and bigger than Sarah Palin. Second, no one votes for vice president. She is a distraction and a temporary sideshow, with all due respect. It is Barack Obama's task in the next 6 weeks to go back, I wouldn't say to use the Rove phrase, on message, but to expand the message, to make it bigger. I can't think of a better phrase than just to say We are not deciding between Democrats and Republicans. We're not deciding between governors and senators. We're not engaged in a moose shoot here. We're talking about moving the United States of America into a new and different century. Now, Barack Obama ought to stand up tomorrow and give that speech.
But, Azizi, the other thing the Republicans have done is, with him having said things like that a lot, right, over the last few months, have said kind of, well, okay, but fill in that rhetoric. We're all for hope. We're all for change. What do you have to say beyond that, Barack Obama? Well, what do you have to say more specifically than that? And I think that's why he came up with a kind of a laundry list in his acceptance speech. And I don't know whether you think that's needed, but how does he take the next step and say, these are not just hollow words. Here's exactly what I mean, and here's why I'm the person for this time. And John McCain, who's, even though he's been in the Senate longer than me and has more experience, is not.
Well, I think I'm going to repeat myself a lot here because we're going over the same ground. But it isn't a laundry list of policies. I'm for solar energy versus wind energy. That's the wrong discussion. The speech is, we must transform our economy on 3 levels simultaneously. We must massively invest in human capital, namely human intelligence, and in research to make America first in the world in innovation. Now, I'm happy to see that the columnist Tom Friedman has picked up on that, but he didn't invent it. Some of us have been talking about it for many, many years. Second, we have to begin the process of moving this country into the post-carbon age. That's central to everything. That is not going to happen in one 4-year term or even one 8-year term, but the process once begun should not be reversed. Third, we must become more competitive in the global marketplace by taking that first step that I mentioned. By transforming the second step of foreign policy, it means to recreate the Truman era of 45 to 48, in which we create a whole new round of international institutions. We've got to remind ourselves that in 1945, none of the international institutions that we have used for 60 years to govern the world even existed. But now it's the 21st century. Those institutions are 60 years old, and they were meant for a different age. Why not integrate, for example, the public health services of the world to prevent viral pandemics? Why not create a global environmental protection agency to prevent global warming? This is all new stuff, and no one is talking about it. Third, when the Army comes back, finally, from Iraq and Afghanistan, we don't need to, what Washington is calling, reset the Army. That is to say, rebuild the Cold War Army. We need, fundamentally, to transform our military in a way that has not been done in 60 years. These are big issues. These aren't just kind of one policy versus another.
Yeah, no, I do think you're striking an intermediate kind of tone between merely uttering the word change and issuing a laundry list.
Not intermediate. Bigger, different.
Well, right. I mean, in terms of level of specificity, you're saying something there that is a little more specific than change, but is not a detailed laundry list.
Exactly.
But
you can make a laundry list out of it if some fly-spec person wants to say, well, what do you mean post-carbon economy? You can spell that out.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I certainly agree. I would have liked to have heard more about transforming international institutions, which, I think if you look at Obama's policies, he's probably ahead there in some areas like international arms control, non-proliferation, but he hasn't made a real big deal of it.
No.
On foreign policy, I'd like to hear a real debate, and this is here is where something kind of odd has happened, which is that in some areas Obama's trying to out-hawk McCain. Now, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, for example, he's almost saying, I will send more American troops there faster than John McCain will. I will be more inclined to strike within Pakistan's territory without the government's consent, and so on. And well, I don't know. What do you think of that?
Well, it's the modern day equivalent of Kennedy's missile crisis. It's
which to refresh the memory of people, he kind of invented, right? I mean, the missile gap was not nearly what Kennedy claimed it was during the campaign. Is that right?
Well, there were some hardliners that argued that Eisenhower had gone to sleep at the switch in his second term, and the Soviets were catching up and moving beyond us, and Kennedy kind of outflanked Nixon by saying, for every missile you build, I'll build 10. Mm-hmm. So he kind of called and raised. Yeah. And I think that's what Obama's doing here. But again, if I may say so, he's playing on traditional political turf, and he's missing the opportunity to change the very nature of the campaign. And by the way, lay the platform for a great presidency. That's what all this is about. It isn't just winning. It's winning to do what?
Mm-hmm. Well, but how would you flesh that out in the realm of traditional foreign policy? Leave international institutions aside for the second. In terms of, I mean, the premise of during the Democratic convention, Obama, it was either Obama or Biden, I think it was Biden actually, gave that line about how, Obama got the picture more than McCain, then, we got to flood Afghanistan with troops. The applause was pretty tepid. As you may recall, we recently embarked on a war that not everyone wound up enthusiastic about, and you would think that there are a lot of people out there who aren't sure that a whole lot more boots on the ground in Afghanistan is what we need. But more than that, more broadly, I mean, Afghanistan's kind of a special case because that at least is in the vicinity of bin Laden. But you take a case like Georgia, okay, or just the question of how trigger-happy we should be in general, and it seems to me that there's a position to be staked out that Obama is not staking out, which is that, look, John McCain is much more likely than me to get us into an ill-advised war. Right?
Well, I think that's true. John McCain would govern in very traditional ways. He would be much more inclined to use force as a first resort instead of a last resort. Although I must say, I think down deep in his soul, he is a much more cautious man than George Bush ever thought of being, because he has not only fired shots in anger and been fired at, he spent 6 years in a foreign jail during wartime. So there's a great deal of difference between people who've seen combat and those who've not in terms of their willingness to invoke casualties on the American people. And by the way, it's not 4,000. It's close to 40,000 casualties. That's killed and wounded in Iraq. And I think Barack Obama's got to continue to call that to the American people's attention. This was it was a false war, it was a wrong war, and it's a failed war. Mm-hmm. And when John McCain keeps talking about victory, it is up to Barack Obama in the first debate to say, Senator, define victory. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tell you, there is no victory that we can achieve in the next 5 years, maybe in 20, but not in 5, that John McCain would define.
Okay. So you wouldn't draw a big line between Obama and McCain on, say, something like Georgia?
Well, I have to tell you, the whole foreign policy establishment in this country has kind of gone overboard on this issue. The closest analogy I can think of is when the Soviets put missiles in Cuba and we almost invaded and started World War III. I mean, this is, I don't mean to sell the Georgians out, but we have a lot more at stake in working out better relations with Russia than we do in defending Georgia. Now, Russia shouldn't have done what it did. But the entire foreign policy establishment in this country has overreacted, and the Bush administration, for reasons that are totally unclear to me, desperately wants to pick a fight with Russia. And they've done everything they can in the last 7.5 years to bring that about. And
Right.
no one has asked them why.
Right. And in fact, our behavior, I mean, what we have done is make it easy for Russia to say, if with slight exaggeration, yes, but for Russia to say, look, what we did in Georgia is roughly what you did with Kosovo. And you know, they declared their independence. You recognized it without any international body, and God knows if Serbia had intervened the way Georgia intervened, you would have probably gone. You know, I just think in a lot of ways this gets back to the business of nurturing international institutions and respect for international law, and it being in our interest to develop a set of orderly legal procedures for working issues like secession out. And it seems to me we've been so casual and sloppy in the way we've handled so many things, not to mention the specific things that were perceived as provocations by Russia, like missile defense and bringing Georgia into NATO for God knows what reason, at least asserting that we wanted to. You know, it's, I mean, I guess I'm just agreeing with you, but it seems to me, I'm surprised as you are, that almost the whole foreign policy establishment is, I guess because on an issue-by-issue basis, a lot of them had bought into the issues that I'm complaining about. It's kind of hard for them to make a fundamental critique of the policy, but I'm really disappointed in the level of discourse over the whole Georgia thing.
Well, there are senior Democrats whose names are well known, don't need to be recited, who have, again, tried to get on the other side of the Republicans in beating up on the Russians. And it's folly on a massive scale. It makes no sense at all. It's trying to find a cause that we can take and use as a sharp stick to poke the Russian bear in the eye. And again, for reasons that are totally unclear to me. Russia ought to be part of the West. I must say, under the last two administrations, we haven't done very well at bringing that about. It's not all our fault, but we could have done a lot better on this side.
Yeah. You know, it's kind of funny that the McCain slogan is country first, because that is actually synonymous with the term America first. But, of course, that phrase has a very different historical resonance. And the resonance of America first is you don't go around casually saying things like, we are all Georgians. No, damn it. The purpose of American foreign policy is to serve American interests first. And I guess I'm just wishing somebody would pick up on that theme a little, which technically speaking means country first. But country first in the old Republican Party would have been, let's get our own house in order, right,
and not try to meddle in all the affairs of the world. That was the traditional Republican Party. And as late as 1976, my former colleague Bob Dole said, if you want to go to war, vote Democratic. And I grew up in Kansas, and that was the mantra of Midwestern Republicans. Democrats get us into wars. And, of course, about that time, the situation was flip-flopping, and it was Republicans who were getting us into wars.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said earlier there are senior Democratic figures who have maybe overplayed the hawk card, whether for political reasons or others. I don't suppose you want to. And you said we all know their names. There's no need to recite them. Actually, I'm not sure who you're talking about. Do you feel like reciting any names?
Doesn't matter, no.
No? You're going to pass on that?
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. I'm not in the business of picking fights.
Let me put it more affirmatively. Is there anybody you'd like to see as Secretary of State in an Obama administration, or a few people, or?
Well, there is a struggle here because you want somebody who combines two things. So-called experience, which is a shorthanded meaning of traveling the world and meeting world leaders and being comfortable in the international arena, but also someone who isn't so stuck in the old ways of doing things that they feel confined and handcuffed to follow policies that have been followed in the past in an age where we need to make some breaks. I don't know very many people who combine both those qualities. Of my colleagues, former colleagues, I am tremendously fond of Chris Dodd from Connecticut, who is an internationalist, speaks fluent Spanish, and has traveled the world and is comfortable in the international arena. I haven't had a chance to talk to Chris about how and I haven't heard him, by the way, popping off on the Georgian business yet, and maybe he won't. I think he's more stable than that, and also is more mature than going around trying to find fights to pick. But there are a number of people on our side. I just hope that President Obama will not go back to kind of traditional thinking inside the Beltway, inside the foreign policy establishment, of people that write the conventional articles and give the conventional speeches and haven't had a big new thought in their lifetime.
Yeah. Well, such is the influence of Blogging Heads TV that I think if you and I nominate Chris Dodd for Secretary of State, it will pretty much be a done deal. So that part's taken care of.
Okay.
But you know, it's
actually what's interesting is not who's Secretary of State. It's often said these days that Democrats care who's Secretary of State and Republicans care who's Secretary of Defense. And I would reverse that, and I would say to President Obama, pick Secretary of Defense first.
And that's because what?
Because you need somebody who's going to manage this transformation of the military.
I see.
From the old nation-state war era of the 19th and 20th century to the 21st century nature of conflict, and who is wise enough and smart enough to use opportunities to reduce threats.
Well, that sounds like you. I'm nominating you for Secretary of Defense.
Well, thank
Gary.
you. I accept your nomination.
Okay, well, that's done too then. We're pretty much set. Now all we have to do is make sure Obama wins the election.
We're doing our best.
And so I guess I'm inferring that, I guess you don't agree with me that a lot of winning a presidential campaign these days consists of defining your opponent's persona on your own terms. I mean, I was developing this idea that the thing to do is emphasize that McCain has a reckless past. I know you think that because he's been to war, he might not get us into crazy wars. But by his own account, he is by nature actually a reckless person. I mean, they bragged about it in the campaign. His wild youth. He has how many demerits he got at the military academy. I think he had crashed planes before he was shot down. He is known as prone to anger. And in a way, the Sarah Palin decision, at least at first especially, looked like it was an example of impulsive decision-making. I had thought that maybe the way to frame him is as this impulsive, reckless guy who will get us into trouble. And Obama, already has this very cerebral air, and to cast him as this person of prudence and judgment who would not have gotten us into the last disastrous war and won't get us into the next one. That's how I would integrate the reframing of McCain as a person with a certain kind of foreign policy message anyway.
Well, there are plenty of people who can do that. That's traditional politics. Certainly that's Joe Biden's role, and there are an awful lot of other senior Democrats who are more than happy to do that. I'd volunteer my own services in that regard, and I've known John McCain for 30 years or more.
Well, now's the time to start. If you've known him and you want to reframe him in those terms, I'm all ears. We need anecdotes, Gary.
Well, but let me finish my point. Barack Obama's role is to be presidential and to be a statesman. Now, I'm not saying that as a tactic. I'm saying it's important for his administration. If he is an attack dog and spends the next 6 or 7 weeks defining John McCain, he will have no mandate to govern. I don't mean to sound cosmic here or totally strategic, but this is important stuff. If the candidate wastes his time or spends his time, invests his time in defining his opponent, that's all well and good, and he may win. He has no mandate to govern.
I think although at this point I think either of them would settle for victory.
I'm sure they would, but that's to guarantee, at best, a good presidency, not a great one.
Yeah, I think there is, right now it's a little unclear how he's going to play this. I just saw a headline in the Politico about how they're kind of taking the gloves off with Palin, and they kind of were including him, not just Biden. I think Biden is very effective in this role because he strikes me as a very likable, commonsensical person, and I think he does this well. And I don't really think, I mean, leave aside the question of attacking Palin per se, I don't think Obama does kind of sarcastic attack very well. Or maybe what I'm saying is he makes it a little too sarcastic or unsuccessfully so or something. I mean, I'm just agreeing with you. I think he should not be the lead attack dog.
You know, Karl Rove would like nothing better than to spend the next 6 or 7 weeks Obama attacking Sarah Palin. Nothing would make him happier.
Yeah.
And nothing would more endanger his chances of success. John Kennedy won the presidency in 1960 because of his sense of humor. Every time Richard Nixon became Richard Nixon, the camera went to Kennedy, and Kennedy was grinning, smiling, and almost rolling his eyes. Not quite. And that won him more votes than anything else. He didn't have to say a word. He let Nixon define himself.
So you would leave not just the framing of Palin to Biden and other surrogates, but even McCain. You don't think Obama should really participate in the personal reframing of McCain?
He can with a sense of humor, and nothing diminishes one's opponent than to laugh at them, to make them a subject of laughter and derision. To take them seriously is to give them stature.
Mm-hmm. So
I think the clever speechwriters can come up with lines a day for Obama to dismiss Mrs. Palin and move on.
Yeah. And on that business of McCain, I don't know whether you were kidding when you said you'd be happy to participate in the reframing of McCain, but this is your I'll give you one more chance if you feel like saying anything about him.
Well, I've said I don't think there's been a McCain profile or biography written in the last 30 years that I haven't commented on. I have commented. I have McCain brain drain. I'm tired of talking about John McCain. I've said everything I have to say, which all boils down to he shouldn't be president.
but why in particular, leaving aside the fact that you think Obama is better, why is it that regardless of who the opponent was, you would probably be saying no, waving us, warning us about McCain?
No, I think for a certain segment of the constituency, John McCain has been a reasonably good senator. But I could say that about my Uncle Fred, who should not be president. There is a certain qualification level, and I don't think Senator McCain has reached it. Now, I haven't seen the terrible temper or any of those other things. If I had, I would comment on them. But maybe it gets down to the statement that a friend of mine made many, many years ago when asked what he thought about his brother being a very prominent person in American politics. And he said, there's nothing more frightening than waking up in the morning and realizing the people you went to high school with are running the country.
Yeah, well, that brings us back to maybe my final line of inquiry, just the question of kind of high school. What I mean, as I said, I think increasingly, to some extent, presidential campaigns involve saying, "Wait, isn't my opponent the kind of person you didn't like in high school?" Now, and aren't I the kind of person you liked, right? And in that sense, I guess in a way it puzzles me that Sarah Palin has been so successful in winning hearts and minds, because it seems to me she's kind of the prom queen. And in my high school, most people actually didn't like the prom queen. And in a way, McCain is a certain type of person that wasn't all that favorable. But I guess I'm wondering, what is your I know you think that the Democrats should not obsess on Sarah Palin, but what is your own analysis?
No, I didn't say that. I said Barack Obama should not.
Right. Okay. So what is your analysis of what has been successful about her? What specifically needs to be undermined by whoever it is who does take on that job?
Sarah Palin will undermine herself. It's only a question of time. She is a short-term media phenomenon. And if a majority of voters in this country think that it is cute to have a moose-hunting hockey mom run the country, then that's what we'll get. But I tend to think the future of this country and the planet are much more serious. And that's what the issue is. The evil genius of the Republican strategists over the past 20 or 30 years has been to so run down the importance of government and managing government that anyone can do it. Now, I know people worship Ronald Reagan, but there was a period of time, and indeed, even in his ascendancy, when he was laughable. People simply said, this B movie actor cannot be president, and he did. He was. And part of that is a systematic effort by ultra-conservatives to so diminish the role of government and those who occupy that role that anyone can do it, including a hockey mom from Alaska. Now, that scares me to death, but that's the age in which we live.
Yeah, that's kind of my question, and other people have asked it, is isn't there some tension between her appeal being her very ordinariness and the idea that you would like most people you would think would like a political leader who isn't just ordinary? I mean, isn't there some intrinsic tension? I mean, you can imagine a super mom, a super dad, somebody who seems they can just do it all magically. But right now, it is remarkable the extent to which she seems to have it both ways. In other words, she's just like the woman next door, except, a little more capable. But on the other hand, I'd like to see her running the country. That's kind of a remarkable perception.
Well, if you are among those who believe it really doesn't matter who runs the country, and that's what the point I'm trying to make.
No, I see the point, and you're right. It's consistent with the Republican rhetoric about governance that their main job is to say no, don't spend money on that. No, don't spend money on that, and I'll cut everybody's taxes.
Well, it's even worse than that. It's government can't do anything right, and so when Katrina happened, and you had a bunch of incompetence from the top down responding, the government didn't work. So what did the White House do but go out and say, see, we told you, the government doesn't work. It's so circular, it's scary.
Yeah. And when you say, give Sarah Palin time, she'll undermine herself, what form, do you imagine just a cooling off of enthusiasm, or you imagine specific blunders, and if so, what kind?
No, we'll wait and see. If she can keep it on a superficial level, she'll operate on that level. But they're going to try to keep her, I think, away from serious debate and serious answering of policy questions as long as they can. Now, whether that can be another... See, this is a very short period of time. I keep saying 6-7 weeks. That's what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Maybe they can pull that off. Yeah. But Bob, with all due respect, we're spending too much time on Sarah Palin.
Yeah, I know, but, she is a subject of some fascination. Well, is there anything else you want to say about this?
Sorry?
Is there anything else you want to say about the campaign in general? I mean,
nothing except to repeat myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the last thing I would say is you do have to give the Republicans credit the way they can take somebody like Barack Obama, a fatherless black child, works his way up and makes something of himself on the one hand, and then John McCain, born an admiral's son, and then his key break in life politically, let's face it, to be, I guess, a little crass, is to get shot down. And then, you know, I know, look, a lot of, and then he underwent a lot of suffering. I understand that. But politically speaking, that was the key thing. And then he married an heiress and parlayed that combination into a Senate career, which didn't take no skill at all. But the fact is, Obama is this amazing story of actually a self-made person, and they have managed to make him the privileged snob in the eyes of a lot of people.
Well, a lot of people are their so-called base, whatever that means, and that's just feeding Christians to the lions. I mean, don't believe that necessarily is working with the vast majority of the people in this country. They've already convinced their own base. Even if they're not convinced that's their story. Question is, will it work beyond that? And that's the test of the American people, which is what a national election is about. This isn't about John McCain, who, by the way, is better qualified to be president than Ronald Reagan, in my judgment, by a long shot, whatever else you say about him. This is national elections are a test of the American people.
Yes, and I'm wondering if they're going to pass this one, but you're right.
Let's wait and see.
Yeah, okay. Well, I really appreciate this, and I hope that when you're Secretary of Defense, I'll get a free tour of the Pentagon, since I just launched that campaign tonight.
Well, don't hold your breath. And that tour involves being blindfolded, taken into Ring E, Level 1, and turned loose. And with a stopwatch that says you can't get out of there in 15 minutes.
I'm told that it's a little maze-like. Actually, I took a tour when I was 6 years old, and my father was working in the Army War Room, and that's the last time I was there. But anyway, if you won't...
I hope you left breadcrumbs.
No, I don't think I had that much foresight. But anyway, I'll enjoy my tour with you, and if a tour isn't the way you want to reward me, kickbacks would be acceptable.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay, thank you, Gary.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.